CT Muga Ndoko in the studio with you this morning. And we're getting into a conversation about misinformation. And our guests are already in the studio, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed. Before we get into that, let's hear today's proverb.
The proverb is from the island of Seychelles. The islands of Seychelles. It's more than one island. It is not worth adding water to the sea. That's the proverb. It is not worth adding water to the sea. Yes. What are your thoughts on that proverb? What does it say to you?
It says to me, it's almost similar to, if it's not broken, why are we fixing it?
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like it's the same energy.
It's here anyway.
Yeah, so
we can't change it.
We can't change it. It's
Why replicate efforts?
Yep.
Why do more of one thing multiple times?
Why not use what you already have in? I think so. What does it mean to you?
That's the whole point. Proverbs mean many things to different people. And there's no understanding that is better than the other. It's how it speaks to you.
Yes.
This is one of those exams where 1 + 1 must be 2.
Well, in the area of information and communication and all these other things that we hear jumping at us every day, those are the two voices and the two faces of our two guests this hour. Maurice Otieno is the executive director of Baraza Media Lab, and Wanjiru Nguhi is the program manager at Fumbua campaign. We've heard that word buzzing around the last couple of days, and now we're able to make the connect, right? And say, okay, media, there's information, there's communication, and then there's Fumbua. So going into the election, even before, months before, we've heard so much in terms of things that are being said. Somebody said this. Somebody may have said this. Somebody didn't go to university. Somebody did not finish. So much that we really actually don't know what is the truth. And then we're probably treading on very dangerous ground. And that's what we're trying to open up today. So let's just kick in, Maurice, and we can, start with you and say welcome, first of all, to Kenya's Biggest Conversation. Good to have you in the room.
Thank you.
Same with you, Wanjiru. Thanks for joining us this morning as we look at this very, very important topic and ask ourselves, how then do we make sure that we're on the right side of right? We've talked about this before in good measure, but I think even as we're going towards elections, August 9th, it's all the more important to say, hey, folks, where are we getting our information from and what are we doing about it? So here is Fumbua. What is that? What is Fumbua?
Yeah. Thank you for having us here. So Fumbua is a media lab. Baraza Media Lab is a media incubator based out of Riverside. Our idea is basically to have a new media that is thriving in terms of its sustainable business model, as well as interesting storytelling models that make the audience get captured to the information that is being shared. So Fumbua came about because we all know that there was something that existed called Cambridge Analytica that happened in our previous elections, and we were all caught unawares as a media fraternity. We actually came to know about it as an aftermath. So now we wanted to be more proactive in the sense that how do we bring more media organizations and media-related organizations, from researchers to fact-checkers, and bring them together way early to start discussing on how do we combat misinformation, because you know that misinformation spreads faster than the truth, right? And sometimes the truth spreads slower. So we are trying to see how do we all combat misinformation by collectively working to make it spread faster, to spread further. So if all media houses are working together to amplify either fact checks or amplify the truth, then it spreads wider, but misinformation will travel faster.
Right.
So we'll always play a catch up. So we started off as a campaign, brought in about 24 media houses or media-related organizations, and just started discussing, like, what are your strengths? And to your proverb, we didn't want to replicate. We didn't want to add more water into the ocean. We're looking at, there's already something that, let's say, you are doing. How do we amplify that?
There's something that I have to ask the two of you.
Yes.
At what point is something misrepresentation, misinformation, and at what point is it just a perspective?
That, do you respond?
All right. When it's misinformation, it's one, you look at the intention. Like when you're sharing this information, what is the intention? Are you trying to convince people, or are you trying to make people feel a certain way? Are you trying to confirm a bias? Are you trying to, the intention? And then also you look at what is the actual truth. For example, right now we're in an election season, and we're in the election season where the IBC is confirming and verifying and clearing. So if, for example, she mentioned the degree, if you don't have a degree, you don't have a degree. If you tell us you have a degree and you don't have a degree, you're misinforming us. All right. If, for example, you are supposed to come up with 200,000 signatures and you don't have 200,000 signatures, and IBC tells you need 200,000 signatures, and you know you don't have those signatures, and then you come and tell us the deep state is coming after me because I am threatening the deep state. You see, now you're misinforming us because the truth, there's the actual truth, and then there's what is favorable to you.
So misinformation essentially is lying.
It is lying, and it is lying in a way that leads to questioning the legitimacy of a process, or leads to questioning the legitimacy of an institution, or leads to making yourself look like a victim. Well, in actual sense, you are actually on the wrong.
How do you understand intent? Because
I think
you mentioned the word intent. How do you tease it out? How do you know that, okay, given what this person is saying, the intention must have been...
I think one of the things is what she said, like who's sharing that information. Sometimes also context matters. When somebody has left out, intentionally has left out some...
That's what I'm saying. How do you know they've intentionally done so?
You need to have the context, the entire context. So let me give an example.
Please.
If I have a video of you running from this point to that point, and that's what I show.
Why would I be running?
For example,
why are you running?
For example, you're running because in this case, she's chasing
me.
She's running
Why
after
is she
you.
chasing me?
So those are the questions that you need to ask, right? Those are the questions that you need to ask to be able to figure out the truth. But if I give that context and then show that maybe there's a lion that is there and that's why you are running away because you saw it fast, then the intention is I've given this perspective and this context that I want these viewers to believe that this is what is happening. Yet if I give this wider context and then you start questioning the why.
Give me a political example.
Political example.
Something that happens in our political sphere that would explain, so that when I look at it, I know,
This could be the reason why this
it,
individual did not want to inform me about 1, 2, 3.
So, for example, and usually misinformation occurs where there's a lot of data that is required. So, for example, if you pin down, I think there was a fact check that was done around the president's speech during Madaraka Day, and he was saying about 12,000 kilometers of road that's been built, right? Then a few days later, the Minister of Roads, I think, says that it was about, I think he said something in the figures of almost 17,000 or basically a huge number. And you find like in that context, there's no data that can show you like this road actually built 12,000. And it's said in a context where it's public. I want to show that I've worked, So I'll not give you the entire context of how much you've built, but you'll only build 12,000. So it's intentionally leaving out some information for you to see them the way you need to be perceiving them.
Okay, so in terms of the general public as consumers of this information, or this misinformation in this case, it seems as though it would be a laborious process to then go and start to find out all of this, okay? Because somebody who's watching the telly or whatever and saying, look, I'm listening to the president's speech, I'm hearing him say this, you're likely to pack and go, right? But we are saying, ears up, everything that you hear is necessary then for you to do a check on. Are we getting to that point where absolutely everything you hear then needs to be something that you need to find out whether it's true or not?
Yeah.
Is that where we are going?
I think we just generally need to be critical consumers with this information age where there's a lot of information that is coming at us, from various sides. And critical consumers is basically going back to the question that you asked, why? Some people don't ask, they forward as received,
But Maurice, how do you determine, even
and
when
then
you
put
talk
a joined
about
under there that I've just forwarded as received,
Okay,
right?
Even as you're talking about being critical, at what point are you critical and at what point are you just simply biased?
Oh, I love that you mentioned the word bias. Because the thing that we have learned about misinformation sometimes, it's meant to confirm the biases that you have. And so by the time you're even checking, if someone is lying to you about something and they're lying to you about something that you're already biased about, then you're probably not even going to check it. But if you're critical about this person, then the chances of you going and saying, no, I don't trust this person, let me just check what this is about. And then now when you check, then you discover, oh, they were actually lying. And so now you now become an active citizen, and now we're able to have an honest public debate. But I think, yes, there's the bias, there's what you have said about being overly being critical. And yes, that's where we are, because we have been lied to, we have been bamboozled, we have been led astray, led amok. So yes, we are at the place where we must be honest about our biases, and also honest about being critical, and also honest about how easy we are to be swayed.
How do you become overly critical? I thought the whole idea was to question things. So at what point do you tip the balance and you are now excessively so, if that's what you do continuously? Or must you be selective about what you think you ought to question? Because if you then question everything, then there's the tag. You're overtly critical.
Yes. No, I think you need to pick, what you are, like what you're critical about, and what your skills can. So I'm critical about these things because my skills allow me to be critical about these things, because this thing matters to me. And so if everyone is critical about the thing that matters to them, then I think we are all contributing to a more honest public debate.
Okay.
I think, yeah.
When you try to unpack some of these things, unfortunately, like you said, this thing has super flight.
Yeah.
Misinformation has super flight. By the time something, whether it be true or not, with the new media that we have, something happens and in a click, everybody knows about it. Now, even as we're saying, be very careful about what you share, isn't it just as important then we try to tail back on the damage that has already been done by misinformation? And then how do you do that? How do you then go back into this stratosphere of all these layers and say, this information is not true. It has gone out. It's done whatever rounds it has done. But how do you circle back and peel back and say this is the right, or that there was really never anything, and undo the damage that misinformation could have done?
I think that's where fact checks come in, but fact checks are not for me, the way I view fact checks, they're not the sort of like holy grail of fighting or combating misinformation. It's just one bit of how we combat misinformation. And the challenge that fact checks have is that they come too late in the game, when things have already spread into private WhatsApp groups.
Exactly.
And your family groups, and now you believe what my uncle has said, then the fact checks come. And the challenge that we've seen is that when they come, because they are not as pervasive as the misinformation, right? And that's where now maybe bringing together various media organizations that have multiple pockets and demography that can share the fact. And yes, it'll be late, but it'll get home later on. You can't. Most fact checkers right now use digital platforms to share their facts. If you are not on radio, if you are not on TV or newspaper, the audience of those mediums do not get to know if this was true.
Okay, so then how would Fumbua work practically, Wanjiru? So information goes out on TV,
Yes.
on radio, whatever. How does then Fumbua work now when you see that? Who coordinates what? How then now do you start coordination between media houses? How does the process flow?
All right. So the process flows. Of course, we have Fumbua has 3 pillars. There's the amplification, the one that he's talking about, where now if someone does a fact check, then it is amplified by everyone. Everyone as a member of the campaign. And then we also have the debunking, which is, I think, the one that is like the game changer, because with debunking it means that you are seeing the process and then you're able to sort of warn people that this is what is coming in the next few weeks, and because this is going to happen in the next few weeks, this is what you should look out for. For example, we mapped out the entire electoral process, and so we have we know what is going on. The IBC is supposed to be clearing people, and because they're clearing people, aspirants are going to come out and say things about each other. They're going to claim that they have degrees that they don't have. They're going to claim support that they don't have. have. And now we are now getting into the season of the manifestos, and politicians are going to come out and say things that they're not supposed to be doing. And so as Fumbua, now the debunking process, now you look at the law, you look at at what certain acts say about these processes, and you make it clear. The IBC qualifications are this. This is what the MCA is supposed to do. So it's almost like we are debunking, but then we are also doing some sort of civic education, so that we're not dealing with an audience that is not misinformed. Because if you do not have the information, then any information goes. And then at the same time, we have collaboration. Where like members of our collective have like everyone has their own activities that they're doing, and instead of doing an activity in your own small corner and there's someone else who's doing the same thing, why don't you just link up and do this thing together? And then we also have trainings which have been very, very successful, where we have come together with the Media Council, the Google News Initiative, and Africa Check, and now they're now training together, and we've done 4 trainings so far with media practitioners, content creators, and even the public. Now we are going into now training the public. This is what to look out for. This is what a fake tweet looks like. This is what a fake Facebook post looks like. When you see something like this, look out for these things, and then it is a fake. It's a fake post, a fake tweet. If you look at a newspaper, for example, this is how a newspaper is supposed to look like, but when it has been doctored, this is what it looks like. And then they're also taught about the psychology of the information. If information makes you feel angry, for example, you have to question why is this emotion? What is this information doing to me? Why does this? Because there's
But what if it's just, some anger-inducing information, and it actually is true?
Sometimes it is annoying, it is true.
Yeah.
But if it's information about someone and it makes you overly angry, you just wonder, okay, am I supposed to feel this way? Is it the truth? Is there something beyond this? Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So what going into this election, into this period campaigns, what are some of the biggest kinds of ideas of misinformation that we have been held captive by in society today, from what you've seen?
Yeah. So in the previous election, it was well coordinated and managed by the Cambridge Analyticas, right? In this case, now you find not even the big, because it's more pervasive on social media, right? But it's not pervasive or spread a lot by the big social media following influencers. You find like this person who has 200 followers, 100 followers, who we call nano influencers.
Yeah.
That's the thing that we're seeing. So those guys are becoming more vocal in terms of how you can see it's very well coordinated in terms of share this information because somebody is attacking my manifesto on Mitumba, and you find like I have 200 followers, because typically it would be like somebody who has 200,000 followers.
Right.
Now the 200,000 followers have become guns for hire, and people know that. So now you find more people who are becoming like guns for hire for now are the nano followers. So the guys who have 200 followers, 100 followers. So that's another trend that we've seen of how social media is being used to influence or peddle some of the misinformation that we're seeing. I think video misinformation, especially on platforms like TikTok, and I hope at some point you can have the researcher who did that, are becoming more pervasive than what are becoming on TikTok, are becoming more pervasive than using platforms like Twitter.
Okay. How would you know if it was successful? That if you were trying to say we're stopping this proliferation of misinformation or disinformation or malinformation, how would you know that it had been successful, that something has then been repealed or then removed, clawed back on in terms of wrong information that went out into society?
I think you cannot pull it out of people who have already seen it. The much you can do is to try and repair the damage that has already been done. And that's why I was saying fact checking is one kind of solution, because it's usually catching up. So if I've already consumed this misinformation, it's gone. Yes, I'll get this fact check. Now I have these two pieces of information. One is true, one is not, but I cannot remove this wrong one. And that's why I think there's a need for a very consistent and persistent media literacy on how we consume information. And the way I'm looking at it is more actually the people who consume, in our experience, the people who we've seen are very susceptible to consuming misinformation are, again, not critical thinkers in terms of how they consume information, because again, I receive it on Facebook, I receive it on Twitter, I receive it on TikTok. I consume it as it comes, I forward it as it is, right? And these conversations start on social media, then come back to closed groups like your WhatsApp or Facebook groups. And you find most people who are using, let's say, your Facebook and YouTube, the people who are either in the peri-urban areas, the level of sort of like engagement, digital civic engagement is not that high. So you find misinformation is also very pervasive in different social demographies. It's not equal. It's not equal across.
I would argue, though, that what you say of people who perhaps do not have the luxury of having these tools to enjoy what the diversity of what social media represents, what you say is true, but it's representative of everybody. Because depending on whatever strata you belong to, they, again, will be things that you are inclined towards and you're inclined to believe. Just like politically, people are inclined to believe anything about their favorite candidate as opposed to someone else and believe the complete opposite of the candidate who is not theirs. So I'm arguing that we are hotwired or to actually be misinformed.
Yeah. Because as she said, it's confirming your biases. You're a human being, you have biases, right? So
yes, we do. So essentially what we're trying to say is, how do you question your own biases?
It's a very critical
How do you query your own biases? How do you even recognize your own biases and admit that you have your own biases? If you look, for instance, at the information we keep reading every time a black person is shot in the States, okay? The impression you get is that these people are killing black people by the dozens, and yet statistics, just numbers, show more white people are shot and killed than black people. Just the fact. But numbers, numerically speaking. But if you look at ratios, and you consider, for instance, that the white people, the people we call white, represent something like 76%, and that the black people represent only 13%. If, let's say, we look at the year of 2020, where 457 white people were shot and killed, and only 241 black people were shot. If you look at the ratios, very many black people were killed. 241 as a representation of the 13% that they hold.
That they exist in the first place.
Those are very many people. Now, when you talk about getting people to understand, do you point them towards getting information? Because information is what unlocks biases.
Yes.
And how to consume that information. And again, how that information is presented.
Exactly. So you see now the way you've put, because I also thought, and I know, you see that black people are being killed in America.
Yeah, in fact, they're finishing them according to the
information.
information.
Even me, I cannot go to America. I will be finished.
Yes,
I cannot do anything in
yes.
America. But now when you've presented that fact, no, I went quiet. I just went, okay. And that's now what now we want people to do, to just go,
wait a minute.
okay, hold up. Hey. That.
Okay, to have a wait a minute moment.
Yes.
And let's take a pause and a break right now on Kenya Speakers Conversation and take a look at weather and traffic and then come back and continue. Fumbua wants us to take a wait a minute moment and say, with this information that you get, what are you doing with it before you forward as received?
Yes. This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
As we're going into elections, one of the tools of politicians, call it right or wrong, is propaganda. They're going to use it because there's certain mileage it creates for them politically. So you already know that there will be information coming from a lot of these folks that is already not true. But it gives them mileage in terms of their campaign. It's used the world over. It's not just a Kenyan phenomenon. Everybody uses it. How do we counter that with this idea?
That's a good question, because even within the world of information, you find there's a lot of terminologies and jargon that sometimes people get confused with, and misinformation, malinformation, propaganda, and what we've learned so far is propaganda is very difficult to fact check, because there's no factual claiming. If I say mtu akitendawili amefanya hivi, or if I say huyu mwizi, so those kind of things you can't fact check. You can't fact check an opinion, and propagandas are usually presented as that. They're usually not as factual as where you can see somebody said, oh, we built road worth this much, or this number of people died during this, terror attack. So there are some things that you can go back and check. And that's where misinformation and fact-checking can help. But for propaganda, it's very, very difficult to be able to check.
Yeah, because campaigns are in the business of mudslinging.
Yeah.
And that you may take something that originated as a truth. I mean, they say, with every lie, there's an element of truth, right?
Yes.
If you take this element of truth and then blow it up into something else, it'd be very difficult to prove when the origin of the thing had, an element of truth in it.
Yes.
But then the question is, what do you do with it? If it's difficult to prove and you received it anyway, and you know that there is, perchance there's something off here, what do? You choose not to consume? Do you spread it across? What would Fumbua do in this case?
So you cannot tell people not to consume this, because there are people who are excited by this politics, there are people who are excited by this propaganda. And I think the long-term work of Fumbua is to also ask ourselves, how far can we go? Even if it is propaganda, even if we're sharing opinions, how far can we go? And now that is where now the government comes in, and the people who regulate this kind of, this kind of activities come in, where they can, have a cap on how far we can go. Because the thing that we realized also working in these campaigns, that people don't mind misinformation. No. People really don't mind. They're just like, but we don't mind. And gossip, you also cannot fact check. Gossip, you cannot fact check an opinion. But also for us is to ask ourselves, how far can this go? And also, and in asking how far can we go, we also have to ask, what is the impact of this thing? For example, when Martha Karua was picked as a running mate, there was a lot of gendered mis and disinformation going on, and a lot of that usually has some real effects even on people, like on women, just in our personal lives. And sometimes it's possible for it to even translate to violence when someone has an opinion and then the opinion is action, then someone takes it and it goes on and on and on and on. So it's also for us to ask ourselves, do we might not have a problem with misinformation, but also how far can this thing go, and can it be regulated? Even if you're talking about propaganda, how far can it go? I know we have defamation, there are defamation cases, there are civil cases. Sometimes misinformation can lead to violence. And so it's now for us to now ask government, okay, with the cases of misinformation you're seeing, what kind of regulation do we expect? What kind of a regulation can we is it even possible to regulate this, and at what fact check? There are things that people genuinely don't have a problem with. Because we have opinions that we carry. Even me, myself, personally, there are opinions I'm just like, if you give me information about this opinion, I'll probably be like, did I not tell you so? So it's also asking ourselves and just being realistic about how far can we go.
Yeah.
So as much as we're trying to say, okay, wait a minute, but also how far? Yeah. How far can we go? How dangerous is it? Where is the line? Is there a line? So we are also trying to find that line and saying, okay, this is the far you can go. If you go beyond this, even we don't understand what your problem is.
Sure.
Yeah.
What about the folks, especially since we're talking about elections right now? What about the folks who are the creators of this information? I'm talking about politicians. How are they involved in this? Because it's like, we're all dealing with, the information which they essentially are creating. Somebody says something, somebody puts something out there. There might be a story that somebody leaked, here or there, by the politicians themselves. How are they being involved in this process of making sure that, misinformation doesn't spread?
I like the statement that you started with, just basically outlining the stakeholders within the misinformation and the disinformation space. So media being one of them, politicians. And I know that there's an organization called CMD, Center for Multi-Party Democracy, who are basically working to hold the politicians accountable by signing like a digital pledge of how they'll conduct themselves on digital platforms. The question is how to hold them accountable. Even if I've signed, how do I hold them accountable? So there are various other institutions that are working within the misinformation space. Our work mostly, because we are a media lab, we focus more on the media side, but we also work in tandem with other guys who are working with the political parties, other guys who are working with civil society, because also civil society or even the ground movements are also very big in terms of spreading the misinformation, because these are people who are trusted in their in their communities.
Yeah.
So also working with them to just become the term that we've used today, critical consumers. You know?
But then, even when you talk about this, I am thinking of the media, the role that the media has in actually perhaps having their own biases.
That's true.
You see, for instance, I'm saying their own because it falls in the category of a bias that has over the years seeped into a system and people accept it as being true. Say racism, for instance. Okay?
Yeah.
If something happens to a black person and the acknowledged perpetrator happens to be white, you immediately see racism.
Yeah.
If the same thing happened to a black person by a black person, you wouldn't quite see it as that. But if in Kenya, we look for a tribal angle to it, just to explain it. Where am I going with this? Two things. One, countries they may not announce it. It's Nazi Germany that actually had a ministry of propaganda. They did not fool around with it. They understood that this is something you need. Okay, we call them spin doctors in this day and age. People who know how to take information and give it the twist that you want. I'm thinking of the Ukraine war. Okay, depending on who you're listening to, you will hear the Russian side saying, "Oh, these people have mined their ports, so we cannot ship out wheat. They have done the other." But a conversation that doesn't take place is, one, who actually attacked who first? And who is perpetrating human rights issues? Then the conversation shifts and you're told, but these people are racists. At the beginning of the war, there was the issue of black people being stopped.
frozen at the border.
Yes,
Yeah.
now.
The borders.
There's a side to the story also. Remember, when you have a war, you conscript. So all able-bodied men, not necessarily young, below a certain age, you suddenly join the army, though even if you're not trained, but you will join the army. So truth is, as people were leaving the country, people who are able-bodied and young were not leaving. They were staying in the country because they had been conscripted. So the only young people who you would see leaving would be black or people who are not necessarily Ukrainians. Those are the ones you'd see leaving. Now, if, say, for instance, there's a bus that they were boarding and the bus has a certain capacity and you already boarded and you're a student and an elderly person who's infirm comes in, the only young person who will be asked to step aside is you, because
the black person.
the locals aren't there. So it is you who will be told, let this elderly person sort of like get in and you can get in on the next
one.
Now, the story was these people are racist. They're stopping black people from leaving this war zone.
They want them to
black
die.
people to die. Okay. Now, did we in the media fact check and ask, and even if we did we highlight the story and present a different perspective to this issue and say, actually, folks, this is the context. So even as this was happening, understand the context. That's why I said biases that we already have, and it plays out in the way we handle an issue. There may have been some fact checking, but did we talk loudly about it?
I think that question then brings us back to what the media is struggling with right now, which is sustainability across the globe. Because then to talk consistently about these issues, you need to have, you need to be sustainable yourself. You can pay the bills. And across the globe, it's something that the media is struggling with. So it's more of like, this is the truth, we've said it, let's move on to the next thing. And also information is spreading so fast, and that's the risk also. Because then the person who fills that void of media as a trusted entity is social media, where now it becomes an echo chamber where everybody's just making noise. They don't want to know that this thing was fact-checked or this thing is true, because it's emotive, right? Black people are being killed, black people are being killed. We don't want to hear, and that goes on social media, and that's where it thrives, and that's where the risk is when it spirals out of that platform and goes now to physical, I think that is how I will explain how the challenge that we are facing globally, especially on the information space, it's also because media sustainability is also at risk.
So are you saying that then the practitioners would rather take in that information and just let it go because there's a commercial aspect to it, and because there seems to be a struggle globally commercially, then it's easier to just let it go than to spend time and resources
Yeah.
to check for the truth.
I don't think they let it go. It's just the effort of, as they say, like shouting about it.
It's not as vibrant.
Because again, you'll shout about it consistently. You shout about it for some time, but at some point, you come back and you're like, okay, we've done our part. But remember, again, the challenge is that misinformation spreads very fast, right? And it tackles your biases, and it's very emotive, So before you make this person unlearn or pull out what they have already seen in their mind, it has to be very sustained and persistent.
But consider, for instance, the double speak that we in the media can be accused of. Okay?
Yeah.
On the one hand, we will talk about how it is that the public is gullible and how it is our public is very highly politicized. And yet we publish politics on a daily basis, and it's front page. It hits you. It doesn't matter what it's like. You can't avoid it.
You can't.
Yeah.
Today's papers are different. I was looking at them. Politics appears in the business. You don't see it anywhere, which is good. Business. The Star, it's on page 7. Standard, it's on page 4. Meaning, it has moved from center stage. But if this is center stage on a daily basis, you are more or less conditioning people to the very position that we again will come and criticize and say this is the way people are, and yet we haven't given them an alternative to consume consistently.
Yeah.
What do you think would happen if human interest stories are the ones which are the headlines and politics is on page 4? It's reported, but on page 4. What do you think would happen?
Let's try it. There's only one way to find out.
But I do honestly think that will change how people are becoming what we quote unquote active citizens.
Think of even news on radios in vernacular, and the news is the people in Marsabit today received this. There was a human interest. The school system, blah blah blah. Headlines. Politics comes later. Is this not what our minds would be focused on? Because this is what we listen to, this is what we read on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Precisely. So when you talk about information, this isn't misinformation. I call it misdirected, because we talk about the things which are important, and yet you focus on the thing which guarantees that the important things that we want are not catered for. Our politics.
But isn't that the thing, though, then, that because biases are being fed and that there are folks who are sitting... I mean, we know that there are some countries who have, just as you said, created departments just to spew out this wrong information. And because we know that, unfortunately, we are bridled by our bias a lot, that they know where to hit, that they know that if we release this information, maybe with an element of truth, it's going to spread like wildfire, and it will cause some destabilization on the other side. And I think that's what you're saying, that we need to be wary of, knowing that it could be true, but at the same time, we also know that there are some folks who are sitting, creating this information to destabilize you, really, in terms of what you think and believe. So are we saying that regardless of what the case may be, we ought to be cautious in terms of what is coming to us, knowing full well that there are people and that there are, organizations that are, stuck hard and fast to making sure that they can send this out in droves?
And that's very true. Like, you look at, was it the previous 2017 or 2013 when there was the Real Raila website that was basically painting him as the worst person that you can ever vote, and that was Cambridge Analytica, with them creating this because they know that we are biased already, so they feed onto your weaknesses and push more information. So, for example, yes, it might not change how you vote, but it paints that doubt in your bias, in your subconscious, are like, so this person, this is true. And I think that's the same case also in the US, where they know that the US is, other continents are also equally, you can face racism as a black man, right? But the US is very pronounced right now because media is highlighting it, and because there's a consistent effort to just make sure that is what they are fighting. It's no longer a war like what Russia and Ukraine are doing and bombing each other. It's more of, how do we make you guys fight against yourselves? And we'll just push the narratives that will divide you further so that you kind of fight by yourselves. And that's what elections also with information might have, where there are biases that some politicians might have already noticed. And then they use these platforms to go to further divide us within those biases, that's how I view it, and I don't think it's an approach that the media alone can solve for. There's
Yeah.
a responsibility also to the government to hold persistent and perennial misinformers accountable, and maybe this will mean that we have to have some policies that are favorable for us. There's also an element of platforms also being accountable. Yeah.
But remember, why fingers have to point at us who are in the media is because precisely that we are the media.
Yes.
And our business is information. Yes.
So you to be honest, media becomes the low target, because even when these things start, they don't start within the media houses. They'll start probably somewhere in a WhatsApp group or actually in some platforms, or in a room that somebody cooks the information to intentionally misrepresent or misinform you, right? And push it onto social media. Then it comes to media. So you find like media are not really the creators. Media are sometimes unconsciously the amplifiers.
Yes. Or sometimes it's a cycle. Sometimes I feel like it's a circle. Sometimes you will publish what is it? What are they called? The documentaries, the exposés.
Yes.
So you will do an exposé, then it will find its way into the WhatsApp groups, and then it will be translated into something completely different, and then it comes back, and then it's like a broken telephone. It becomes a broken. So you said one thing, someone else read one thing, then another person. Then by the time we know it, we have believed all these things, and we have spread all these things, and I don't know, I don't know what your responsibility there would at that point.
Would you say the gutter press are part of the media?
Yes, they are.
And someone takes a deep breath.
Number 6 will shock you.
I think there will be.
They are.
They are. Yes, they are.
Yes.
And they also need to be, and that's the risk, especially with and that's why I was trying to map out the journey of misinformation, where it starts from. Because where it starts from, the way the social media platforms are structured, they are not media, right? And that means even regulating them or holding them to account is very difficult.
So which means social media is really not media.
It's not.
It's
I mean,
media related.
Yeah, well,
it is, but they don't want to accept it, because if they accept it, then they're highly regulated, which removes the algorithm and how they earn the money. Yeah.
Okay, we continue this conversation. We want to take a break and say goodbye to our audience on KTN Home, but not to forget the conversations continue on SpiceFM in Kenya's biggest conversation. A few minutes to 9 o'clock. Right back after this. So even as we are coming and wrapping up this conversation, Maurice and Wanjiru, we may have glossed over it just a little bit.
Yeah.
But looking at the dangers of misinformation, you're talking about, it can lead to violence. Some of these things can happen. You have two sides warring against each other just because of something that was put out there. I often find that, isn't it important to look at some of the dangers that lie in this misinformation that we see floating about, and what could happen as a result of not dealing with it.
I mean, like I mentioned, there's the violence. So if you and this violence is usually when a bias is confirmed, a bias against a certain people, and we've seen that in 2007, where the violence was a whole different, like it was deeper issues. But then now, when information about a certain candidate and a certain community was shared around, then it now exploded, and now we are not. And then there's also the danger. The thing about misinformation, it's also very distracting. So instead of having conversations about the real issues, we're having conversations about what is true and what is not true. Well, the truth is, right now, the cost of living is really, really high.
Right.
But now we're having conversations about who has a degree and who doesn't have a degree. We're having conversations about who could be whose son and who could be not who. So it's also very distracting. It puts us in this race that doesn't even make sense. Instead of, focusing on we are now in an election, these are the leaders we should be voting for. These are the qualities of the leaders we should be voting for. We should be looking at our cost of living. We should be looking at the state of women, like real issues. Now we are debating about who is whose son, who is married to who has a degree, who slept where, and it is very, very, very distracting. And if it is distracting, then it means we will forever be in this cycle of nonsense leaders and nonsense shenanigans. Because I think also that is also the point, just to distract us, and that is also very dangerous, especially for democracy. And also the thing about the public debate being kept honest and being able to hold our leaders accountable for actual things.
Right.
We can't do that if we are being bombarded with flowers that are not really flowers. They're just things. I find it's annoying because it's distracting.
It is.
To me, at least, it's very distracting. And I'm just like, okay, wow. So can we get back to our lives?
Can we get back to our lives?
But you do know that the only
and can we get
reason
back to the
why-
price of oil and the price of
but the reason why the yellow press exists
Yes.
is because we love these things. These things we call nonsense. People love those
These
things.
shenanigans, yes.
Something to keep you busy
People want
from
to
your
read and say,
reality.
oh, you
though, isn't
mean
it?
so? This is really.
This is good.
But then what do you do when you're in the moment and reading those things that you forget your problem or the
Exactly,
issue?
and that's the danger.
Yeah.
So we keep
Yes, you do.
forgetting about
Yeah.
the problem. So we keep getting deeper into the problem because the soil. Now we're digging into this. So now the soil looks like it's
But
cotton
also,
candy.
there's a
and-
limit to how much and how long you can just keep focusing on your problems.
Indeed. Maurice and Wanjiru, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Fumbua KE on
Yes.
Twitter and on Facebook. How can you make sure that the information that you're getting is valid? And what can you do in case you doubt? There's fact checking. There's a lot that can happen. Thank you for being in the situation room with us this morning.
Thank you so
and
much
definitely
for having me.
conversations to continue with. Asante Sana.
Thank you so much.
And we hope we can have you again. It would be
Thank
great
you.
too.
Thank you. Thank you.